Just let me start by acknowledging what a crazy, crazy year this is. I mean, really, just who could imagine this? Who could imagine this? And I will say that the ability to do things like we're doing now, where we can see each other's faces, where we can interact together, have been life preservers for me. They've kind of kept us connected and kept us sane. At a time when it's, I started off by saying to Michelle, how are you? And we're like, how do you answer that question? Because it's just, who could be doing well in these circumstances? It's just really hard. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge how grateful I am to the PJCC for pulling together a series like this, where you can meet the different leaders from the different congregations and communities. We can learn together. Many of you who don't belong to my synagogue, I feel like we are part of a shared family. We are connected and we know each other, and you always feel welcome here, and I feel welcome when I'm at your synagogues, and all of that sense of no boundaries and no territorialism and no competition, and we all just revel in one another's differences and successes. That to me is an extraordinary community to be part of. So I'm really happy to be part of this North Peninsula. And you should know Redwood City kind of sits on the middle of North and South, and there are different, each community has its own culture, and the culture of cooperation and not just cooperation, but respect, love, and support in the North Peninsula is extraordinary. So those are my introductory remarks. Every year around June, I sit and I write on my whiteboard every possible topic or thought for the coming year's high holidays. And I fill the board, and I just let whatever's kind of in my heart or in my mind just get put up on that board. And this year, in June already, I put up a line from the High Holiday Prayer Book that's the title of the class, if you read it, that I just kept coming back to. I kept coming back to the words Hayom, Harat, Olam. Today, the world is born. It's actually much more complicated than that, those three words that sound so simple. And I think the reason I kept coming back to it is I just wanted I wanted to start the year over again. I wanted a redo. I wanted a sense of, can we begin again? Which to me is always a high holiday theme. The high holidays, it's actually an audacious, bold statement. The world begins again. You begin again. And that ability to recreate, that ability to say, new beginning, what do I need to build from? That for me is a powerful, powerful message. So I kept coming back to that. And then at Hartman this year, I don't know how many of you did Hartman. If you didn't do Hartman, do it next year. Hartman has amazing teachers. Rabbi Gordon Tucker taught about this text, and I learned about it in ways I had never really understood. So we're going to learn about what does it mean to say, today's a brand new beginning. And I hope that it speaks to your needs as you're preparing for the holidays in the coming week. So I'm going to share the text. Hayom Harat Olam. And I certainly want to credit Rabbi Tucker, who I took many of these ideas from. When is this prayer said? In the conservative movement, it's said before we blow the shofar in the Musaf service. So in the Musaf service, there are three themes. There's the theme of Malchuyot, God is king. There's the theme of Zichronot, memory, asking to be remembered, remembering moments in history, and Shofarot. And each of those sections in a conservative service has 10 verses. 3 from Torah, 3 from prophets, 3 from writings, and then a concluding one. We say a paragraph that sums up those themes, and then we sing this song, Hayom Harat Olam, and we sound the shofar. So this prayer precedes sounding of shofar, and it sums up the section that we just read. So today, the world.
Sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Can you mute everyone? Because there's some extraneous noises. Thank you.
Can I unmute everyone?
I can.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So unmute or mute, or I'm going to leave that to Michelle.
I'm going to mute.
Okay, there was, and so then if you want to unmute, you'll be able to unmute, but there was extraneous noises, so thank you for that. By the way, if that happens again, just chat Michelle. Chat Michelle. Hayom Harat Olam. The word Hayom means today. Harat is an interesting word because it can either mean is born, or it's also the word for pregnant. So those of you who are Hebrew speakers know that the word for pregnancy is herayon. Olam can mean the world, or it can mean eternity. So look at the different ways you could translate it. Today, the world is born. Today is pregnant with eternity. Today, the world is pregnant. It's interesting translations. Look at the translation from Lev Shalem. Today, the world stands at birth. Today, all creation is called to judgment, whether as your children or as your servants. If it is your servants, be compassionate with us as a parent is compassionate with children. If it is with your servants, we look to you expectantly, waiting for you to be gracious to us as the day emerges from night to bring forth a favorable judgment on our behalf, awe-inspiring and holy one. When you look at this paragraph, I'm going to stop share for a second so I can see all of your faces. What would you say the theme of the prayer is? What's the theme of the prayer?
That you can start over.
That you can start over. Give me more themes.
Possibilities.
Possibilities. More themes.
A new beginning.
New beginning. More themes.
Expecting.
Expecting. More themes.
Renewal.
Renewal. So if the world is born today, new beginnings, renewal. I mean, this is a powerful, powerful prayer. It's interesting, the words after those three words, it seems to also talk about judgment. And I wonder if judgment also plays into all of those things that you just said. If look at the prayer again. Today the world stands at birth. So that's all those things you mentioned. Creation is called to judgment, whether as your children or as servants. And there are different ways that we judge. A parent judges a child compassionately. Servants, we hope, will be received graciously if we're God's servant. And what we're asking for is favorable judgment. It's interesting, Rashi translates Hayom Harat Olam is today, judgment is born. So hold on to those three words. If you're taking notes, write the three words and what they can mean. Hayom means today. Harat can be born or pregnant. Olam can mean world or eternity. Look at how it's translated in each different prayer book. And what's interesting is many prayer books and commentators feel a little wary about these three words. And the reason they feel wary is because when you say something is born from something, today the world is born, you know, it implies on a certain level divine sexuality. You know, if the world is born, who was it born from? The people are uncomfortable with this when you go a little deeper into it. Who bore what? Who impregnated what? How did it get born? And so know that there's a little bit of discomfort with what this means, and that gets reflected in translation. So again, Hayom, Harat, and Olam. In Art Scroll, which is more traditional, today is the birth of the world. All creatures are in judgment. Here's the old conservative Machzor. Today the world is born. All creatures everywhere stand in judgment. Here's the Reconstructionist one. Today the world is born. So far they all seem to be the same. Today shall stand before you all the beings of the cosmos. That's a little bit different. It's moving away from judgment and having you stand before. The old Reform prayer book says, this is the day of the world's birth. That's a much different translation, because it's almost like we're celebrating something that happened in the past. This day, all creatures stand before you. And it's saying what it is about this day is everybody being in judgment. It's moving away from that sense of the world being born by the divine. And it's saying this was the day the world was created. This is the conservative machzor that we use here. Today, the world stands as at birth. They're trying to look at it as a metaphor for constant renewal, which is how I looked at it. Today, all creation is called to judgment. This is the new Reform machzor, the one edited by the martyrs, she was at Beth. Today, the world is born anew. Noted that they tried to make this about constant rebirth as opposed to birth of world. Today, the whole of creations stands before you to be judged. Notice that they made creations plural. I'm going to stop for a brief second and ask if there were nuances in terms of those translations that hit you. Anything stand out in terms of those translations?
For me, it's the idea of being in judgment, that we're being judged.
Yes. And Marilyn, does judgment, is that a positive thing? Is that a scary thing? Is it a negative thing? Is it something that can result in renewal?
For me, it's an unknown, because you don't know which way it's going to go.
It's an unknown. So there's a little bit of trepidation in it. There's a little bit of trepidation in it. Anyone else have a thought? Ellen? And then,
well, my thought was that when you talk about the world now, everybody says, oh, the world is going nuts. The world is going crazy. The world is, you can't even think about what the world is like. So what this says to me is that there's potential, that when the world renews, that there is the potential for good and for a better world.
There's the potential for a better world. And when you weave that in with a little bit of judgment and we don't know where things are, then it's actually a really, really poignant prayer. Cynthia.
The world in judgment seemed to me negative, and it seemed to me that you were born in judgment, which means that that had a very negative feeling for me. And I got, the thing that really struck me was that judge us, but there's not proportion. If judgment always feels like you're going to look at the wrongdoings, as opposed to you have 98 good doings and 2 wrongdoings, and is all the concentration going to be on those 2 wrongdoings? It doesn't seem to me that there's a sense of proportion that I think is how one has to judge a life.
Excellent. Now let's go back and look again at the context. If his children be compassionate, and it's almost as if the author of the poem knew Cynthia's thoughts there and said, judgment is often so negative. Do it like a parent. Let our judgment be positive. And if we are servants, be gracious to us. Let it be a favorable judgment. You can almost hear them saying, let judgment be anew. Now, when Ellen talked about potential and on that sense of everything can be new and different, look at how the Mishkan HaNefesh, the New Reform Machzor, emphasizes that. Today, the world is born anew. Translation actually brings interesting interpretation. Now, listen to the commentaries. Here's in the conservative, Lev Shalem. The ancient rabbis debated whether Rosh Hashanah is the first day of creation of the world, or the sixth day when humanity was formed, the emphasis on the word Hayom suggests this is no mere anniversary celebration. Rather, all humanity, all creation are recreated anew. And when I mentioned, I put this up on my whiteboard, I really think that sense of how do I emerge from this pandemic anew? What have I learned? What have I taken in? How do I recreate as a result of having been isolated? And the powerful kavanah of recreation. And so I would write the kavanah statement for each of you. How do I recreate anew? So I want to leave you with questions to hold on to. Look at what is in the prayer book of the Reform movement, the Mishkan HaNefesh. I know this is the one used both at Bethel and at Shalom. Rosh Hashanah celebrates the creation of the universe and also of humans with the potential for continuous self-creation and self-improvement. Rabbi Hayom Herman Kivel writes, Rosh Hashanah carries the momentous message that the human potential, the crown of creation, possesses limitless capacities for renewal. Thus, the sages teach that on Rosh Hashanah, God says to us, my children, I look upon you as if I had created a new creature. So it's not just how do I recreate anew, but how am I a new creature this year? In some ways, as odd as this year has been, it has opened doors for recreation and renewal. Max Artz wrote in Justice and Mercy, this prayer is like Unetane Tokef, where we have God writing in the book. The judgment day occurs on Rosh Hashanah, the sealing is on Yom Kippur. The decision relates to this life, the decree can be remedied and even repealed by the decision of repentance. And so this says judgment is not fate. That I can alter judgment. I can alter my destiny. How will I do that? So for me, the power of this prayer, is that it leaves me with so many different possibilities of reflection so that I can emerge anew. The prayer takes on a whole different context when you look and you see where it came from. It came from the book of Jeremiah, the words Harat, Olam. Those words don't appear any other place. And what the prayer book author does, what the poet does, is it takes the original context and turns it on its head. You're not going to know that until you see the original context. And that for me is fascinating, that the author turns something on its head, but we who might know the source hear the echo, and it deepens our understanding of what this verse can mean. So are you ready for Jeremiah? Jeremiah was a man who lamented being a prophet. And the reason he lamented being a prophet is nobody listened. He was scorned. He was reviled. So get ready to read where this text came from. This is Jeremiah chapter 27 through 18. You enticed me, God. I was enticed. You overpowered me. You prevailed. I've become a laughing stock. Everyone jeers at me. In other words, he doesn't like being a prophet. By the way, sometimes when you speak religious truth, people don't want to hear it. And I really feel Jeremiah's pain. Every time I speak, I must cry out, must shout, lawlessness, rapine. The words of the Lord cause me constant disgrace and contempt. In other words, he points out what's wrong in society and culture, and people deal with him with contempt. I thought, I'll not mention God. Who wants to be constantly ridiculed? No more will I speak his name. But God's word was like a raging fire in my heart. shut up in my bones. I could not hold it in. I was helpless. So the prophet has to speak, even if those words are difficult words and no one's listening. I heard the whispers of the crowd. Terror all around. Inform. Let's inform on him. In other words, they're going to go tell the king, you know what? This prophet is saying that the kingdom is going to fall. All my supposed friends are waiting for me to stumble. Perhaps he can be entrapped. Perhaps we can prevail upon him. What people do is they criticize the messenger. Let's take our vengeance on him. And Jeremiah laments that he was born. Go about halfway down. Accursed be the day I was born. For me, this is one of the most painful texts that you can imagine. The prophet who says, I wish I wasn't born. Let not the day be blessed when my mother bore me. Accursed be the man who brought my father the news and said, a boy is born, and gave him such joy. Let that man become like the cities which the Lord overthrew without relenting. Let him hear shrieks in the morning, the battle cries at noontime, because he did not kill me before birth, so that my mother might be my grave. Her womb big with me for all time. Rachma, her womb. Harat, pregnant. Olam, for eternity. Why was I born? To see misery and woe, to spend my days in shame? So the words Hayom, Harat, Olam, in this context mean today is an eternal pregnancy. I wish I was never born. Now, I want you to understand what the author of the prayer book's doing. The author of the prayer book's doing is saying, don't read Hara as Harat Olam is pregnant forever. Read Harat Olam is the world today, the world is born. In other words, this is about renewal. This is about new beginnings. This is about incredible things. But we actually know that the context is a different context. We know that the context is the prophet of Jeremiah. So the author of the prayer, are people following this, has taken the original and reversed the meaning. He's taken this moment where Jeremiah fantasizes about never having been born because the world is so crummy. He doesn't want to see it. And he's turned it on its head to mean the world is replete with incredible, incredible possibilities. Knowing the origin, for me, is powerful. Because the origin says, this prayer also reminds me that sometimes the world is so painful we don't want to face it. This prayer reminds me that sometimes people can be so rotten, I don't want to have to deal with them. Yet the author takes those emotions which need to be expressed and weaves it into a different meaning. No, today is full of renewal. So here's my suggestion. My suggestion is that the words Hayom, Harat, Olam allow us to give voice to pain while also seeing potential. So what I want to do is I want to write that this allows voice for pain and sees potential beyond pain. And my question for you is, what is my pain? What makes it hard to face the world? And then what potential exists in that pain? Okay, I've just thrown a ton at you. I've taught that the prayer, Hayom Harat Olam, is taken from a text where the author has turned the original meaning on its head to reflect something else, while also asking that you remember the original meaning, which then results in the potential of holding on to both the original meaning and where the poet ran with it. By the way, the prayer book is a complicated book because you need to know where is it that the person, that the prayer pulled from. Because when you know where the prayer pulled from, it deepens the different ways you can understand that prayer. Hayom Harat Olam, according to Jeremiah, is today, let it be an eternal pregnancy, because I wish I was never born because the world is so rotten. The poet says, no, today the world is born with all of its potentials and its new meanings. And I'm suggesting that we hold on to both. We hold on to pain. We hold on to that sense of I can't face the world. We may even say, I hold on to the fact that sometimes I'm unable to give birth to all that I know I can give birth to in terms of my dreams and my hopes and my desires, but I need to burst out. And I'm going to ask for your comments in a second, because I've thrown a ton at you, but I want to suggest that for me, a high holiday message I'm going to share this year is that unless we can give voice to our pain, we can't get to renewal that has so much potential in these times. So the Jeremiah context of Harat Olam being eternal pregnancy, which then is taken by the poet in the Machzor and turned on its head. Give me thoughts, comments, reactions.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi,
I just
Rhonda.
wanted to say, I love the imagery when you said, these words have been turned on their head, and then thinking of a baby being born, the head first. So it's, even your words go with that renewal and birth.
Nice. You know what? When we studied this text with Rabbi Tucker, the women in the course had much more to say in terms of the imagery of birth and pain in birth, and even turning on its head, the head emerging, kind of backwards, upside down, turning over, turning around, as pain translates into something incredible. If there's an author I'd love you to look at, she's actually a public speaker. Her name is Valerie Jaur, Jaur. And she writes a lot about pregnancy, and in her culture, that sense of the generations being there during pregnancy and letting her give voice to pain it's such a powerful TED Talk. More on the Jeremiah reference that this comes to. Thanks, Michelle. More about the Jeremiah reference that this comes from. There should be 50 hands up. One hand up. Judy.
Yes. Okay. So at PTBE, we in our Saturday morning study, we read all of Jeremiah. It's a couple years ago now, but he's a very dark prophet because he does feel so beleaguered by speaking out. But if in fact his wish in this section came true, none of us would be here.
That's right.
And it is so painful, some of what we see happening with the earth and what we can bring it to modern times with politics, etc. But if we don't have hatikva, we don't have hope, then we aren't going to be here at all. So I like the idea of holding both of these, because when we go through painful times, we really do need to think about what we can do to change that, what the renewal is, what the rebirth is. And I do like, also, I agree with what was just said, how beautiful it was that you introduced this with the words of birthing, because for a lot of us, that really does make it very real.
Thank you. And by the way, it's in the Hebrew, Hayom Harat. Mm-hmm. It's birth. Yeah. And Judy, I so appreciate it. If we just read that section of Jeremiah, you would say, oh my God, this is the most depressed man in the world. Mm-hmm. The man who the world is so fraught with upset that he doesn't want to face it. And I think that's what a lot of us are feeling. We're looking at political polarization. We're looking at anger. We're not able to go outside. And we're saying, who wants to face this? And I actually, if there's one thing to take away from what I'm going to teach today, it's that unless we can name our pain, we can't get past it. So the second day of Rosh Hashanah, And I see a couple more hands are up. I appreciate that. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, in the conservative movement, we read a haftarah from the book of Jeremiah. And that haftarah is the exile streaming past after destruction, going into Babylon. And there's Jeremiah, this prophet of doom, who said, you guys are about to be destroyed, who's standing there saying, Yesh tikva, there's hope. So it's only, I think, because Jeremiah was able to express his pain, that he was able to come to envision what else can be. And the scene that's connected to that is he's buying land. Look, who buys land as people are running away? He's buying land because he believes in the future. And again, if there's a piece of kavanah I can give you pre-high holidays of express your pain so that you can then re-image it into a different future, that's what I would do. If we're just expressing our pain, then we're sitting with it and we are utterly laden with those travails. But if we're seeing it as that which can birth from pain something new, then it's a really different thing. So Catherine, I see your hand up, and then Ellen, I saw your hand.
Yes. So I can really feel Jeremiah's pain in that. And I have a son named Jeremy. So as a mother, I can feel the pain of not wanting to be born at all. But as remembering back to when I was an expectant mother, and that would be a horrible sentence for a mother, like pregnant for eternity, would just be terrible. And on kind of just a side note, just an interesting thing, my oldest son is turning 29 on Friday, on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And I'm flying tomorrow to celebrate his birthday and Rosh Hashanah with him. And I'm really focused a lot on it being the anniversary of humanity, of creation, of God breathing life into us. And at the same time, his 29th anniversary of being alive, of God, granting him life. And so, kind of celebrating that with him.
So when you say Hayom Harat Olam, you're both going back to those moments of beginnings, and you're re-imaging what can be as you move forward. So it's a text that powerfully moves you to moments of beginning, birth, and all that means, and then what else can be. And the imagery, now that we're developing it a little bit more, becomes more and more powerful. If I'm zipping through this part of the service because I'm worried the service is getting too long, Hayom Harat Olam, today the world is born, think about new beginnings. People aren't sitting with, let me really sit with the world and all that was born, and the people that were born in my life, and the ideas that were born, and the hopes that were born. Let me think of beginnings. Let me think of pain that's connected to them, and then let me think of how I move forward with new beginnings. Ellen.
Well, Catherine kind of said what I was going to say, which is that I don't think that sentence in Jeremiah could have been written by a woman prophet.
Right.
Because a woman prophet never wished that on anybody. So, nor is an eternal pregnancy possible even. Mm-hmm. So as much as he might wish that he had never been born, it's not possible. So you're still going to end up with a birth and all that birth entails.
You might, as we mine his pain, I actually want to take people back to the verse because people are really doing extraordinary things with the verse. His pain is so deep that my mother might be my grave. There are times when that happens, that I stay in the womb all of the time. Ellen's right, that can't happen. And here's my suggestion about this. You're right, this had to be written by a man on a certain level. But I think that sometimes when we are in pain, we stop seeing even those around us who we love and their pain. He no longer can see his mother's pain of what would remain from an eternal pregnancy because he's so consumed with his own pain, his own rejection. And I think that unless we can acknowledge the depth of our pain and the impact of that pain, we can't move beyond it. A piece of pain, I'm witnessing this, is that sometimes we don't see the impact of our behavior on others. He didn't see. How could he say that about his mom? But he was so desperate in his despair that he couldn't see beyond that despair. Miriam and then Cindy.
Oh, thank you. He actually doesn't want to live. He doesn't want to have life. He doesn't. It seems that the piece about eternal pregnancy could be eclipsed by the other piece he says, which is, I just don't want to be born.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there are people who've gone through terrible, terrible pain, terrible depression, that the mental illness that we know exists. We have it in our families. Some of us have experienced it. That feeling of, I wish I was never born. It's a real, it's so painfully and powerfully expressed. And maybe by naming it, Jeremiah is able to move past it. That it's when we name the deepest of despair that we experience, rather than trying to cover it over, rather than trying to deny it, rather than trying to deflect it, that we're able to grow to another person. And that to me is Jeremiah. Jeremiah, who actually became the prophet of hope. I love Jeremiah. Cindy.
I love the whole pregnancy and birthing issue. And I think that what happens after you give birth is that pain is so quickly forgotten. It doesn't linger with you at all. You have the potential, you have a new life, you have a new way of going forward, and that pain seems so worth it for what you've gotten.
You kind of needed Jeremiah's mom to jump in here and say it'll be okay, which is really what the author of the High Holiday poem did. The author of the Holiday poem didn't just say it'll be okay, but so much can come of this. I want you to see a sermon from Rabbi Norman Lamb. This was written in 1963. And he uses the imagery of shofar. Remember, this is done right before the shofar is blowing. He uses the language of Jeremiah, which you now understand. And I'm going to read you this. And I you're all getting how I like to teach. I want to hear what you have to say. But I have to say, when I read this, I was both so moved by it and so pained by it. Listen to what he writes. This is a few months after the March on Washington. This is to an Orthodox synagogue in New York City. He writes, each of us possesses wonderful native abilities and marvelous inner resources. Either we can opt for Jeremiah's Harat Olam, remaining forever with our greatest human treasures locked up within our hearts, never brought to fruition, like a child prodigy for whom a brilliant future is foretold but never manages to translate his genius into real achievement. Or we can joyously proclaim, Hayom Harat Olam, today we'll express those capacities into reality, for today we shall fulfill ourselves by giving birth to a new and fascinating world. You know what? That should be bolded and outlined. That's just a beautiful way to read those lines. It is this in truth, which is the response to the challenge of the shofar. The shofar was once also a call for the liberation of the slaves. The rabbis considered the words of shofar tru'ah to be related to the word tro'em, thus meaning the shofar's call to break the chains and release the slaves. The shofar summons us to break the bonds of habit and indifference that keep our vast treasures locked up and our repositories of goodness and faith impounded within us to transform the eternal waiting of Jeremiah's Harat Olam into the living immediacy of the Machzor's Hayom Harat Olam. It is the call to release and emancipate our talents, abilities, and greatness. This year has been a historic one for the Negroes of our country. They have heard and responded to their shofar call. They've taken the decisive step from unrealized potential to a new and exhilarating reality. For the past 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, the vast talents of this great community have gone to waste. Who knows how many Einsteins and Oppenheimers, George Washington Carvers, or Ralph Bunches may have been born, lived, and died unexpressed and undeveloped during this long and dark period of Harat Olam, frustrated gestation of genius, immense human riches, always in the state of possibility, yet always coming to naught. This year, the Negroes of America have decided to transform their possibility into actuality. They have announced to America, Hayom Harat Olam. Today, we create a new society of dignity and honor. And even if we must lose lives of our innocent children, we shall break out of our stupor and enable our people to make their contributions to this land as freemen and equals of others. I need to kind of take a breath after having shared that with you. Because part of me sees how he takes Jeremiah's, I wish I was never born, and says, that's the situation we have left the African-American community in. And they are proclaiming their freedom. They are emerging. Their unrealized potential is being born, and is being born today. And that extraordinary statement of possibilities being realized, weaving in unrealized with Jeremiah and what can be with the poem, that to me is the civil rights movement. That is the issue of racial injustice that we are facing. The pain for me is that Rabbi Lamb wrote that 50 years ago. And part of me says, okay, those ensuing 50 years, much indeed has happened. So much more needs to happen. And we are having a new awakening now. A new awakening out of awareness of that pain that in many ways, the white Jewish community has not really internalized until these last few months. So for me, Hayom Harat Olam is the statement of awakening to new possibilities based upon learning and listening to and understanding pain and reality. That for me speaks to my soul. It calls on my conscience. So I want to take a brief break. I'm going to reshare before I ask for comments, Rabbi Lamb's statement for you to glance at again. Note how he weaves it in with shofar, the call to break the bonds of habit and indifference. Maybe that's what the shofar is this year. I thought about a class on shofar because I think the shofar is really calling to us this year. Release, emancipate talents, abilities. Thinking about what has been locked up, held in the womb because of the systemic racism, injustice, educational opportunities deprived, housing and economic opportunities not extended. And now we have a chance to create a brand new world. So I'm going to stop the share and I want to take a few comments. Rabbi Lamb's piece. Comments, thoughts. Please, Steve.
I wanted to say something first about Jeremiah. Judy reminded me that when we were studying Jeremiah, month after month after month after month of rebuke, anger, terror, it almost seemed unending. It never seemed to end, and it finally did end. And in a way, I think we're in the Jeremiah moment here in our world.
Yeah.
It's going on and on and on rebuke after rebuke. It doesn't seem to end. It will end at some point. There will be some return from this exile that we're in, or maybe another way to look at it is a birth. We don't know what world we're going to be born into, but we all have some role in making that world a better world than the world we've been in, not just for the last few months, but for the last few years and even longer. And I think it's a call. This birth is a call to action for us, and a moment for us to be the Ezras of the return from exile and make this a new world. The other thing you mentioned earlier about the kind of the dispute about which day this is. Is it the anniversary of the first day or the sixth day? And there's maybe this is a little legalistic, but it turns out that water wasn't created before. Water was there before creation in Genesis. God didn't create the water, so this to me tells me there's a world or a universe before us that existed, and I think the message is that our little universe that we have here is something that we have to make good and have the birth be a creation of good in the world. Otherwise, there's other universes out there that where they're doing a better job, and it's our chance here, but not the only one.
Extraordinary. That's great. By the way, water as that which surrounds the womb. I have a feeling that as you kind of continue to process this, there's going to be so very, very, very much. Birth is a call to action. Steve, that was a very profound statement. Hayom, Harat, Olam. Today the world is born. It's only born on a certain level through our actions, through our thinking through what do we want to birth, through our acknowledging of pain. And when you know the Jeremiah reference to that, it shifts that prayer. Sandy.
The rabbi's sermon in many ways makes me feel sad.
Yeah.
62. Many of us, or 63, many of us here lived through that period with the hope, with the desire that there would be change.
Yeah.
And here we are almost 60 years later, and we're rerunning.
Yeah.
What did we do wrong? What went wrong in this world, in us, that brings us right back to where we were, except this time there's more violence? And is part of this new, I can't call it a revolution because that's a change. Presumably we've been through that revolution. Is this new awareness because of COVID, because we've all had to step off our own little world a little bit to stay more centered and think about what's really important here and what can we do, and how this time can we make this a more equitable world that we inhabit and help move forward. So there's a profound sadness as I read those words.
Right. I also felt profound sadness. And I think that a piece of the soul searching that I hope the Jewish community is doing, I know that I am doing, is what did we miss? What did we not see that we needed to see? What are areas that are connected to the injustice that is real that we didn't delve into deeply enough? You know, and I've been someone who's been deeply involved in social justice work for a long, long time. But this period has opened eyes to things that I may not have seen as clearly as I needed to see. And I think all of us are doing that. And to be able to both say, what did we miss, while also saying, what do we do to move forward in a different way? That for me is the call of Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world is born. That's going to take a lot of work to figure out what that means and how we do it, especially when we're seeing violence connected to it, especially, I mean, it's complicated. It's not, new beginnings are never easy. Birth is never easy. Raising kids is never easy. And so for me, the metaphor is an important metaphor. So I'm experiencing what I have experienced every time I teach, which is I have way more that I want to do than I have time for. I do want to share with you one last text, because it gives you another way to turn this over a little bit. And I think it will. Michelle, by the way, can you post the text I sent you as a PDF for people so they can have the text themselves?
The whole sheet that you sent me?
The whole sheet.
Yeah, I can either, I mean, yeah, I can send it out afterwards to everyone.
Oh, that's great too. I would love people to be able to have it, especially that Norman Lamb. But get ready for this next one. This next one for me is a jaw dropper. Wow, now I understand this in a way I never did before. And again, I only found these through Rabbi Tucker at Hartman. This is Sarah Friedland Ben Arza. This was a Hebrew article, so you're not going to be able to Google her and find the article. It was translated. The use of birth imagery for creation is not common in Jewish sources. That's what I pointed out at the very beginning. Today, the world is born. That's just not common in Jewish sources. This is understandable, given the transcendence of the God of Israel. Birth images assume a continuum of species identity between the begetter and the begotten. In the Jewish world, though, the Shekhinah may place itself in this world, and even though humans are created in the image of deity, there is yet an unbridgeable gap between an exalted and eternal God and a limited creature. For that reason, the use of other images of creation of humans was preferred. So I want you to understand that on a certain level, the radical nature of the words Hayom, Harat, Olam. Look what she does with that. Thus, our liturgical poem, Hayom, Harat, Olam, contains a twofold deviation from the norm. It's exceptional in relating to the event of birth. By the way, commentary about how this relates to the event of birth needs to be written, and by some of you, because it's really, it's powerful imagery. In addition, the image it conveys is not that of male seeder of world, but rather of a pregnant mother. Today, the world is born. It's not that today God has created the world and you are recreated. It is today the world is born, which is female imagery. In all the years I have read this poem, I really, really never caught that. We are focused on the emergence from the womb. The word hara means pregnant, to give birth. The birth itself is a metaphor for creation. In this way, a continuity, an imminent connection between creator and creature receive an emphasis and a particular force. The world is born, God birthed it. I am part of that which is birth. It is true that the image of conception and birth of the world is quite out of the ordinary, and it appears explicitly in the Rosh Hashanah prayers only in this poem. However, it also appears implicitly throughout the tapestry of scriptural readings for the first 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Think about it. Day 1 is the birth of Isaac. The Torah, the Haftarah, is the birth of Samuel and difficulty in conception. Day 2 is, the taking of that son, the binding of Isaac, the aftermath of that. The Haftarah of day 2 is Jeremiah saying Rachel is crying for her children as they are going off into exile. The stories chosen to be read are stories of conception. Look what she does with this. This is a minimalist midrashic move, talking about what she's about to do. Without adding a single word of their own, the sages presented us with a narrative about the day by placing these 4 readings, the Torah and Haftarah for day 1 and 2 at center stage. These chapters succeed in creating a correspondence between the relationship of the Holy One to the world and the relationship of parents to offspring. It thus presents Rosh Hashanah as a day of birth. The foundational story of the world born on this day, as it is laid out for us by by means of these parental narratives is a story of a world that halts its journey each year on its day of birth and looks back with yearning towards the womb from which it emerged. No wonder on children's birthdays, we reflect back. It is the story of a world in exile, like that of Ishmael and Ephraim, that senses the distance between it and its progenitor whenever it reaches the day of its conception and birth. So look what she's doing. She's saying the day of birth reminds us of the distance between that which has been birthed and the person who birthed it. Moreover, since the scriptural readings do not make philosophical statements, but are stories, they invite us to read them in such a way that we can identify with more than one character in the tale. Indeed, this kind of deep reading can bring the worshiper and the reader to share the pain of the Holy One, God, the parent, who must face the distancing of the children. On Rosh Hashanah, say the sages, God created the human being, and each year on the day of the birth of humanity, God measures again the gap that ever widens in proportion to humanity's maturity and the complexities of its life's patterns, life paths. By means of empathy with Abraham's need to part with his two sons, with Hannah who must relinquish her child to God's service, with Rachel crying for her exiled children, it becomes possible to relate to the day of the creation, not only from the point of view of judgment, but also from the perspective of compassion, because the word for womb, rechem, means compassion. I find sometimes when I read a text like that, I need to kind of breathe, think, reflect. Hayom Harat Olam. Today is a day of birthing where we feel a connection to the one that birthed the pain of them, and then the distance as we go on our way, and the measuring of that distance. Look at how humanity has not yet measured up to what it can be. Today is a new beginning to reorient ourselves to that potential. So, wow, I'm going to take a deep breath. I do want to give room for another comment or two, and then we'll conclude. Thoughts, comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. That text took me a few days to sit with, actually, after Rabbi Tucker presented it. I had never really thought of all of the stories of the Torah and the Haftarah being stories of birthing, the pain of birthing, the separation that happens, the realigning of what my expectations are as the one who birthed with where humanity is. So, what I want to do is wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful year, a Shana Tova. It's really my pleasure to teach you all and to be with you all. Everyone unmute and wish one another and me Shana Tova.
Not Tova.
Thank you.
Shana
Thank you,
Tova.
Rabbi.